Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. And 2 years ago, I sat in another room and asked a question: is it time that we looked at extending the repack cycle? 2 years on, I think I'm still asking the same question, and we've developed it over last year, and then we put out a questionnaire, and we got some results in from that. And I'll be looking at some of those things and where we go from here. Or what I think we're going to be doing from here. So we're still 6 months. America is still 180 days. Canada has recently changed to 270 days. I think that's the only country that changed in the last 12 months. The reason I've got America up there is 180 days and highlighting that it's only by FAA riggers. Listen to the talk following me on that one. Is that's not going to change. So a large part of the world is still going to be working on 180 days, whatever we decide to do. Going to America, you're going to need it packed by an FAA rigger, and it will be valid for 180 days. And it's got very easy to check that it's actually an FAA rigger that's packed it. We changed our seal process. Rick did some great pictures and stuff and what have you, so that we could maybe work it in around the back door a little bit. But now they just put 3 letters of your seal in and they know whether a name comes up or not. So it's just online, the FAA. So there's no getting around it. And the Parachute Industry Association and the Canadians appealed to change that rule. The rule's been in force forever. The larger centres chose to take a liberal attitude to it and nobody kind of said anything. Whether somebody asked a question and then we got told the answer, and that's what screwed it all for everybody. But the FAA's response to the PIA's request was basically, we're not even going to consider it. It's not a safety issue as far as making a change, so we're just not interested. It's not their problem. So America is not going to change. So just kind of accepting that America is going to stay 180 days and they're not going to change anytime soon. But if you need to go to America, I've got an FAA rig. No. So see. So we decided after this time last year that we really need to get some more opinion rather than just the few examiners that were getting together and chatting about it. So British Skydiving conducted a survey, and so if you haven't seen the results or you've forgotten them, I'll just run through them fairly quickly. Should British Skydiving extend the reserve inspection repack cycle to 12 months for licensed jumpers equipment? And you look at on the right-hand side as who was saying everything, but we've basically got 75% of absolutely everybody going, yeah, this is a good idea. And overall, it was 81 yes and 19 no. Okay, so that means we should definitely look at this and see whether it's something we can do and whether it actually makes sense to proceed with it. We asked some other questions, and should we do the same with tandems? And pretty much, nearly 2/3 were going no. And interestingly, the only people that kind of passed the 50% mark are the DZ operators. So that might be financially driven, I don't know. But you look at everything else, display team leaders who don't really have much of a say in tandem equipment were the next highest, and then it was a minority of all the other groups, which fitted into one of the proposals that had been on the table that we just looked at licensed jumpers. But so it was worth a question. And we asked about whether student equipment should be done as well. What's the hardest working equipment on the drop zone? Probably the tandem equipment, but then on some drop zones, maybe they've got certain sets of kit that do quite a lot. But again, we're looking at, nearly 2/3 basically going no. And again, you look across on the right-hand side, and again, it's just the DZ operators that are in a majority of wanting to change. So with that information, I was sort of thinking, okay, let's just concentrate on the sport equipment. which had been the proposal that would be our starting point anyway. It's what Australia have done. They've just done it on sports equipment. Tandem and student equipment is not covered by their 12-month thing. That's kind of a room to think about. So one of the other questions, which also came up from our session earlier this morning, is should we introduce a mandatory inspection of the mains? Way back when we first introduced the record of inspection, we did actually have a line to put in the details of what the main was. And after a little while, we decided to take that out. In fact, if you're nearly as old as me and you remember those things, when we first introduced the ROI, we were changing it almost every other month, as we kind of probably brought it in before we'd really figured it all out, because we did make a few changes to it in that first year. Interestingly, rigger examiners sort of think, yes, quite definitely. And again, the vast majority are in the plus side there. The ones in red, display team leaders, advanced instructors, instructor examiners. Don't know, it'd be interesting to know why they were maybe a little reticent of it. Maybe they were just thinking about how do you actually do it, which is where do you record that and what happens if somebody changes it, because that was the reason why we took it out of the ROI, was that I can do the MOT and you drive it home and take the tyres off and put the worn ones out again. Well, actually, yeah, you can do that, and it doesn't invalidate your MOT certificate, so why can't we just do the same? Now, I know that several people routinely write down information on the ROI, loop length, number of jumps on the AED, and some write down what the main is. And we could just do that. And so we wouldn't need to change the forms. We could just go as good practice, or we can make it a rule that when you inspect a reserve, you write down the serial numbers, etc., of the main on there, if it's something that we decide that we need to do as part of the routine inspection. So I think that's got room for us to look at and consider. If anyone's got an opinion at any point, wave your hand and I'll give you a microphone, because I'm not just here just to say my idea. This is kind of putting it out there and thinking a little bit. If we go to 12 months, should we have something in between? And 59% said yes. DZ operators in the 42, display team leaders, and instructor examiners definitely just below the line. Riggers, 77, 80, 89% kind of. So the riggers kind of feel that having an interim inspection is probably a good idea. And then again, we need to think how we do that, who does it, what does it involve. So we need to flesh that one out a little bit. And I think we need to look at that and get that into place before we can actually move to the 12 months. It needs to be all part of one thing. What should that interval be if we agree that doing an interim inspection policy would be a good idea? When? How many jumps? Should it be 6 months? So we just basically, okay, we sign the ROI for 6 months. At that 6 months inspection, another rigger, advanced packer, can do an external inspection and then endorse it and extend that. Is that the way we want to go through things? The 6 month makes sense, or would it be better to do it on a jump numbers? Some people do a lot of jumps on one rig. So 6 months on somebody's rig, well, the 6 months on my rigs last year we just don't really. Just hardly jumped last year. Whereas somebody else will be doing several hundred jumps in the course of a year. The opinion was that basically 6 months made most sense, 59%. 100 jumps or 6 months, which came sooner, 25%. So I wondered, well, maybe that should be 200 jumps or 6 months, whichever came sooner, or do we just go with 6 months, which is relatively easy to kind of police. We can police jump numbers nowadays with most rigs, because most people have an AAD in there which does act as a jump counter. But who's going to police that? Who's going to make sure those things happen? So, so maybe the 6-month kind of, you know, and then you revalidate it, which is what we did during COVID, but that was for rigs that weren't being used, so it was a different inspection. But that was the idea that we came up with during that time. Do you think that moving to 12 months will enhance safety? And this is really where it kind of gets difficult, because if we're looking at changing a rule, we really should be doing it because we think it's going to make things better, not just cheaper. Because there's an argument that says it's not going to make it cheaper, we're all going to charge more for the repack anyway, especially if we're doing the mains now as well. So I think that we need to build the argument on why is it a good idea to extend the repack cycle. Personally, I think we can do it, and the argument is whether we should do it. I think there's enough evidence out there for countries that have gone to 12 months to say that it's not creating a problem. But what is the advantage of going to 12 months? And that's the bit I think that we need to build on and come up with things. So simply, let's start with licensed jumpers equipment, leave students and tandems out of it. Are we going to include an inspection of the main? Yes, I think we should. How we record that needs to be specified. Are we going to do an interim inspection? I think we should. Again, we need to specify what do we mean by that, who can do it, how's that recorded, and how do we argue to anybody that asks, why is this getting things better? And that's an area that I definitely think that we need to do some work on. Include the inspection of the main. What are the advantages? Well, this morning we talked about some of the things that maybe we would be picking up. Toggles coming off the end of the brake lines, not having proper stowage for the excess, pilot chutes that don't really fit the rig, or people aren't used to, kill lines, all those things. We tend to do them. Most of us, when we're doing a repack, will do those things, but let's have something properly. How are we going to record it? Things. What would be the disadvantages of having a main inspection as part of whatever interval we're going to do? People can change their mains, so what is the value of it? And the discussion we had last night was basically, for most people, it will make a difference. For most people, it will make sense. And maybe that's the way we need to do it. Maybe we don't have to legislate for the lowest common denominator. We can legislate for the majority. So for the majority of people, we'll give you their main when you're doing a repack. The last 6 repacks, one of them came without a main. So just endorsed saying no main attached. Alan would sort of argue that, well, just don't pack it. Give me a main so I know that you're not trying to squeeze something too big in, you know, and it's like I'm inspecting a whole set of kit. So we could take that attitude if we wanted to. So that's the main. Interim inspection, how do we develop that? 6 months, 6 months 200, whatever comes first. How do we record it? Who, what, where, kind of the things we need to come up with on those things. We've had a few ideas, and I've explained some of them, but we need to kind of come up with a proper proposal for these things. Arguments for how does this make the sport safer? Can we come up with any? One load organizer explained to me that he has 2 rigs. He only gets one packed once a year. The other rig was off-road, so he doesn't then jump, or you know, he then jumps unfamiliar kit. Or are we making some jumpers only jump for 6 months of the year when they'd quite like to jump for 9 or 10 months of the year, but it's not worth getting a repack for that couple of jumps, keeping you current on the kit that you're used to. So I think that is an argument, and I think we can develop that and kind of go, yes, this is definitely, we can keep jumpers more current because their rigs go. That's why Canada went to 9 months, because they have a 9-month season, and it's like, okay, fine, we can pack it at the beginning of the season, and it goes through the season. They don't jump for 3 months over the winter, most of them. So why don't we go for 9 months? Because that would create a logjam at this time of year when everybody would want their reserves packed. By having 12 months, there's no penalty for leaving your rig in December with a rigger who can then pack it at leisure and do all the little bits and pieces with no pressure of work, because it's going to be 12 months and it's going to be winter again when it comes around again. So that's one of my reasons for wanting to go to it, to get away from the pressure of packing that we're all facing at the moment with everybody coming in and what have you. The argument that less handling equals less wear, therefore you prolong the life of the thing, because PD are on record as going, it's the handling of the reserve that damages it. How many times do we pack in a reserve? You know, it's like PD canopy, we're packing 40 times, we send it back to PD, and they can come back and pack it another 40 times. We're not handling a canopy that much that the argument really kind of supports it too well. Conclude it, but it's not a very strong argument. We need to come up with a better explanation as to why we think extending it would be better. Also, we need to present as part of the whole thing the other side of the coin. So we need to do what are the pros and the cons. And this is something that we've been changing within British Skydiving when we make proposals now. It's not just, I've had a good idea, can we do it? It's got to be a paper that's presented with the pros and the cons and what are the fallouts and what have you. So the council is expecting the subcommittees, SDC, riggers, to do that before it kind of gets to the stage. And that's where we're not quite at. When we last discussed this at riggers, we didn't really come to a conclusion because there were some arguments against, there were some arguments for, but there wasn't a combined, coherent kind of idea that we could take forward. We probably could have gone to a vote, and if you went by the survey, we would have probably got it, but it didn't feel that we had a consensus of a coherent, complete package that we can take forward. And I think it is a subject that we are going to need to take to SDC. In fact, riggers have been told that it's an SDC decision, not a riggers decision. But I think council are going to have a say in it, and there's a fair possibility that the CAA would have an opinion on it as well. So we need to kind of like get our ducks in a row on that. So we've now got forms that we have to fill in, which is just what I'm talking about. So the proper papers with pros and cons, et cetera, and at the moment, nobody's presented me one of those. So that's kind of where we're going. And anyone out there that's not on, that isn't a rigger, and you want something raised at riggers, you need a rigger to put it forward. If you've got an idea, you need your chief instructor to put it forward to SDC. It is, unless you're a council member. There are limits to who can actually raise things or send papers in. You can write the paper, but you need somebody else to support it. So what's the likelihood of us progressing? Well, 77% of riggers, 82% of SDC seem to think that it's something worth looking at. Okay, they're quite supportive of it. Mandatory inspection of mains, 65, 55. I think we need to kind of build that up a little bit. I want to kind of be over the 2/3 for these things if we're going to really look at it. And the interim inspection, yep, again, 80% of riggers, 82% of SDC think that's a good idea, but that's in its nebulous state. We need to come up with what do we mean by that and what can work. So, anyone got any ideas? Anyone got any proposals? Anyone writing the 354 ready for me? You know, it's just like, yeah, so that's kind of where we are at the moment. So people kind of thought, oh, is this coming in? That's why it hasn't. We only had riggers meetings in the latter half of last year, so there was a bit of a hiatus at the beginning of the year for various reasons. So that's why we haven't made a lot of progress, but that's where we kind of, well, where I am at the moment. And I think we need to make a paper up that deals with these things. So we're looking for ideas and moving on that. That's kind of where we're at and why we haven't come forward to SDC and said, right, okay, we want to do this. Because the thing is not complete at the moment. We need to do some work on it. Comments, questions? Oh, very quiet.
Wow. Mm. Go on,
So watch this space. I think, from the survey, the membership would say it's something that we want to look at. But I think if we're going to convince people at the CAA, and I think we have to consider it will go that far, then we have to be able to justify why we're doing things. Alan. Yep. Oops, that's my mic going flying.
See, I like making you work. Quick question. Obviously, a lot of figures up there, a lot of percentages. Where did you get all them from? How they all came about was my first question. I know it'd be nice to see a show of hands in here how many people fought against 12 months, just out of a curiosity point of view.
Okay, so the survey, my mic, don't want dead. Okay, the survey was conducted by BPA. They sent stuff out, they got it back in. Kev did the spreadsheets and what have you, and came back on it. But that was kind of following on from this time last year.
You sent that out?
Yeah.
Not on the mailing list anymore.
Never were.
I was under the impression that our insurers also had a stake in this item.
Could well have, yes. So again, I think that's why we need to basically make a case and not just go, it's an idea. France have done it for X long, Germany have done it for 20 years, therefore we can. I think we need to kind of flesh that out so there's a bit more of a factor. And I think that's why we definitely need to kind of stress Brian Cummings' comments about currency. And when he came up with that to me, and I thought that makes a lot of sense. Because I do know customers who, no, I'm not packing it in the winter, I'm going to just jump 6 months of the year. And it's like, and as a chief instructor, the other hat on, it's like, I don't really want people having 6 months off. It's bad enough when we have 3 months off. It's just like, so again, I think that's not, it needs to be structured. Save money.
So picking up on Alan's thing, forgive me, who is, it's a Friday, who's a non-advanced packer, non-rigger type person in here? Innocent skydivers. Put your hand down if you don't want a 12-month repack. Don't want it. Put your hand down. So leave your hand up if you do want a 12-month repack.
Who wants a 12-month repack?
Who would like a 12-month repack? Oh, okay. Interesting.
Okay.
There's your straw poll. Well, it's going to, and frankly, in the offices, they won't let us talk money. They don't let us talk about the finance side of it, but we make a living out of this. Like an awful lot of I always say about 1/5 of the skydivers in this country are making money out of the other 4/5 at any one time. Instructors, coaches, you name it.
If the price didn't change, I like the fact that someone who knows so much more than me is looking at my kit, so I like how it is.
So now I know who's here. Yeah, you're right. So now I know I'm here. Did you know that we're not required to look at your main? You did know that.
Yeah, I do know that. Yeah.
But they also know that at Langer we do it.
I do know that. Yeah. Apparently, only last week.
So here's my pitch. I no longer care if it's 6 months, 12 months, or 5 years. I really don't care anymore. The interesting piece out of all the conversations we've been having, for me, is this business of the main. If we all regularly had to inspect the main, and if that's how the world worked, and you'd expect it that we would inspect the main, it would be in there, it would be factored in, priced, serial numbered, controlled. How low would our how long would our malfunction rates go in this country? Bearing in mind all that stuff over there that Ryan was teaching out, and all those numbers started with a main either not being pulled or not working or doing something wrong. Well, if the main's all fixed, a lot of that goes away, and an awful lot of our reserves never get used. And I think that's the biggest take-home from all this, personally. This main piece is, to me, more important than the annual repack malarkey.
You don't have to change the frequency.
I was about to say the same, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's it. You wouldn't have the frequency, you just
Yeah.
get the main thing in there.
The financial side is a major point on this from many perspectives. It's not just what the customer's paying. To go back from the main repack, I've never packed a reserve without inspecting the main and packing the main as well. So I give the customer the rig knowing is safe to jump. That's just my personal thing. When you look at the financial side, what do I charge? I'm the most expensive rigger in rigging. I always have been the most expensive, so I really don't care. People either use me and pay the extra or they don't. So that's an individual rigger's point of view. What he charges should be down to him. However, financially, value for money is a different thing, because what you're getting now is every 40 repacks, you send it back and get a service. People are saying that should be mandatory. It's not, but they're saying it should be. Everybody around the world sends it 40 repacks. They've got a year repack system. We've got 6 months. So they get 80. They get twice as many jumps out of them before they go back to the manufacturer. So you look at what the manufacturers are stating compared to what the association is stating, and you're looking at what the riggers are charging. You bring it all together. Value for money would be, to me, a 12-month repack cycle, right? What the disadvantage is, what we're talking about now, is are they going to charge double? Well, no, they shouldn't. You charge for the reserve repack, and then you charge a lesser price for the inspection, because that's still valid how it does it. Don't assume it's just going to double, because that's what riggers do. In my mind, riggers aren't charging enough anyway for what they do. We have the cheapest repack prices in the world in the UK, right? And it's not right in my mind. But value for money is, when you're packing a reserve, how are you selling it to the customer? How do you justify your value for money? And part of that is what it costs to own that kit. Your lifespan is half of any other country in the world because of our rules. So you look at the big picture, bring it all together, is how you should value a 12 months against a repack, 6-month repack cycle. What you are paying and what you're getting back from it.
Behind you.
Can I just ask, what is the standard going?
So, because I'm from Belgium, I don't know what is a basic standard going repack price in the UK, approximately. Because you're saying you're the cheapest repack. Okay.
So yeah, so I'm also from Belgium, and I'm a rigger. I'm a full-time rigger, and the way we approach it, or the rules back in Belgium, is we have one time a year. It's a mandatory annual inspection, and it's the complete kit. So it's everything. The main is also included, and so everyone brings in the rig, packed or unpacked, doesn't matter, and then we do a full inspection of everything, and yeah, people back home, they only know about this, so they don't question it. Actually, they bring it in one time a year, and I think that's a good thing, because you have, of course, skydivers doing 10 jumps a year. Maybe the inspection is going to be easy, because there's not going to, lines only have 10 jumps more than last year, especially customers who are with us for 10 years in a row doing barely any jumps. They're the easy customers. And you also have some customers who do like 300 jumps a year. And there is always wear and tear on the gear, always. So if you let it up to the discretion of the skydiver himself to bring in the gear, the main canopy, I think we talked about it, the malfunction rate will definitely go up, for sure. So that's what we do annually, one time a year, like a repack and an annual inspection, and then the second time, 180 days later, it's just the standard airing of the canopy. We do some brief inspections, of course, on all the gear that on the pouch, BOC pouches, the risers, everything that wears out from using it. The pilot chute, key line, blah blah blah. The main canopy.
You don't air the reserve.
We air the reserve, yeah. But then.
Doesn't that classify as a repack then?
He's on about every 12 months to do a repack.
Sorry, I thought you meant in
No,
between.
no.
Sorry, I
No.
apologise.
No, so that's the annual thing. So everything and then half a year later we just do the air of the reserve and a brief inspection of the most important components, and then we repack the reserve again without having like a proper look at all the seams of the main canopy. We have like a brief line check, there's like a quick visual view, because you know your customers, you know that is a guy that jumps a lot, you know that's a guy or a person that doesn't jump a lot. So that's the way we approach it.
Okay. When the French went to 12 months, they followed up. The French Federation put out a thing a year later, reiterating the fact that one of the reasons they'd gone to the 12-month inspection was to do a better inspection, and it that was an argument we were trying to avoid making, because it kind of suggests that we're not doing a good one at the moment. But that was kind of how the French said, they were kind of reminding the reserve packers that the reason why it's now 12 months is so you do the whole thing. And that's one of the things why it brought in, for me, the idea that we need to bring the mains back in, and we need to kind of have the time to do those things.
That's what I mean, I don't have the perfect nobody has a perfect solution, because otherwise it wasn't a discussion for a few years already. It's the same with us back home, but I think it should be something, and it's hard to how do you call it, police it. It should be something like jump number dependent. Someone who does 10 jumps a year, for example, again, for me as a rigger, even as a rigger, one time a year, the complete cycle, one repack a year, one complete animal inspection a year is more than enough. If that's someone who does over 100 jumps or 200, whatever, we need to define it. It should be like a jump number inspection plus the timing then, of course. That's what I would suggest.
And behind you?
Hi, I'm got no vested interest, just as a skydiver, but I've got a background in aviation engineering, and worked for Airbus, British Airways, and did lots of maintenance on aircraft, and the production engineering of that. And it always came down to us was, what does the manufacturer say? And if you want to extend that or change that, then you can do it quicker if you want, but it's obviously going to cost you more money. But if you want to extend it, then you need to find the evidence, which is what you're talking about. So I haven't heard, what does the manufacturer say? So is that the same for every canopy, for every system?
So
and why, if it is 12 months, why aren't we doing that with the mains as well? Because I think that's a valid point. It's a piece of aviation equipment at the end of the day, and that's really what we should be. We should be at the core. Should be, what does the manufacturer say?
And I think one of the arguments is that we can say that there are things on an aircraft that are checked interim, and there are things on an aircraft that are checked once a year.
And
that's why they do an annual.
Numbers, there's different measures and different metrics that you can use.
And the things we've not been doing are the things that perhaps we need to do more often.
Yeah.
And realistically, does it make a difference to the reserve functioning, whether it's been in there 6 months or 12 months? And the limited data that we have and the experience from other countries that have gone to 12 months is it doesn't. Yeah. But is that enough of an argument?
Same,
and that's
is every manufacturer of a main reserve, is it the same? Something's working.
Now, the manufacturers don't agree. However, the majority of parachute manufacturers now say 12 months. And they like the idea of 12 months. And that's why they call it back after 40 repacks, because they assume everybody's on 12 months. So that just says. However, not all the manufacturers agree. The Parachute Industry Association have tried to get together with every single manufacturer around the world and say, let's have a standard of what we all recommend together. And it's gone to their rigging committee. They've spoken about it. The interim is, yeah, we all agree with 12 months, but, to make that mandatory from a manufacturer's point of view, I don't want to get involved in making anything mandatory. That should be the Parachute Associations. So they're trying to pass the book, because otherwise it makes them liable. So the association itself cannot agree at this stage. So I'd probably say 50% of the manufacturers recommend 12 months. The rest don't recommend anything at all. I'm correct in saying that? That's what I've worked out.
I don't think you're far off there, yeah.
And the PIA rigging committee, obviously, it's about all the manufacturers and all their departments involved. So they have a lot of say in the development, the testing, the approvals, and that's their outtake on it.
Yeah, I was trying to look up my presentation from last year and put the wire out, because we did highlight what some of the manufacturers had said last time out. We've got a few more minutes left, but we're running out of time. Is it going to come to life? There we go. Okay. So PD are happy with 1 year cycle if the local governing body says so. Aerodyne, basically the same 1 year intervals in normal conditions. They don't define what abnormal is, but I'm suggesting possibly Australian beach landings. Don't want to pick on Jersey. Dubai maybe, you know. Parachutes to France, up to 1 year repack cycles are approved. 40 repacks, they want to see it again. Has anyone ever sent a canopy back to Parachutes to France after 40 repacks? No, okay. That's my fear, but you know. And not all manufacturers agree. So Paratech within 12 months, Icarus up to 1 year, Strong 365 days. They can't even say stay a year, but that's, the Americans seem to like days and things. And that, yeah, so. But they were the major ones and things. But quite a lot of manufacturers aren't giving a number.
The last slide.
How do I do that?
Press back.
So that was some studies that have been done on parachutes, so just quoting some things. There aren't a lot of studies out there, and it took us a little while to find the reference to the graph of how the opening degrades over time, which was done. It is in the Pointers book, but trying to find the transcript of that report. It was written before the internet, so it's not, you know, it's in some library somewhere in America. So I haven't actually seen the report, but these were just some reports that came out about the studies that they'd done, and it was the one for vacuum pack parachutes was basically, yeah, 7 years is fine. Head box ejector seats are normally 2 years, but can be 5. So different manufacturers do things. Is that a hand up?
Beat you to it.
He was before you. He was before you.
Just a quick one. The French military did do a presentation at PRA many years ago, and what they did, they took 30 reserves, which they were using their equipment. They took 30 reserves and put it on the shelf for a 10-year period. After the 10-year period, they checked the porosity of all those being packed and used. At the time, it was a 4-month repack cycle. They checked the porosity against the brand new ones. The center cell, the one cell you lie on when you're packing all the time on the reserve repacks, are deteriorated to a level below the manufacturer's porosity recommendations, and they had to ground all the reserve, all the canopies during that period. So they decided to go for a longer period, to 6 months at the time, to have less wear and tear on the center cell. Now, when you look at the big picture, the center cell is not the be-all and everything. It's the one that takes all the wear when you're packing it. So the porosity on the rest of the canopy was great. But it was interesting to see that presentation, how much damage is caused to the one center cell on a reserve during a repack. It's actually quite considerable. And that presentation was an eye-opener at the time, but obviously it's quite old back now.
But was then supported by the wear and tear that PD did in their study on things. So. But that, yeah, it wasn't any reserves and things, but yeah, so not all of them.
So I guess out of curiosity, how often do you find as a rigger or an advanced packer, you open up a reserve from a 6-month cycle and you go, holy crap, what have you done to this? Like this repack would have had an issue versus, you know, you open it up, oh yeah, it's fine, you know, no issues whatsoever. I mean, I guess this is probably also like you know, if someone jumps their ass off all year, right, they are going to potentially have more issues or chance to cause more disruptions than someone who maybe does 100 jumps, maybe 50 jumps a year, and the rig mostly just sits in the cupboard most of the year, right?
So if somebody's swooping in the desert or on the beaches, then there's much more grit going to get into their containers than if somebody's doing accuracy onto a covered tuffet. So it's the kind of jumping in the environment they're jumping in that does. The reason why some of us felt that it was time to look at the repack cycle was because after COVID, I got to see a lot of rigs that hadn't been packed for over a year. And in some cases, it was 2022 before we actually saw them. People had just not jumped, 2021. And it was like, okay, so I'm now seeing reserves that I'm popping and pulling out that have been packed 6 months ago, and I'm doing the next one, which was packed 2 years ago, and I'm not seeing a difference in how it comes out on the ground. Now, that's not a scientific study. That's not a real world study and things. That said, if you've got an Icarus main, I wouldn't want to leave it in there more than, well, I wouldn't want to leave it in there for 6 months because they come out like a brick, some of them. And you can play football with it and then put the bag back on it because it's not moved. Reserves aren't made of that material. They don't stick in the same way that I've experienced, which is why I kind of thought it was something that we could explore. We are running out of time, so any final comments?
So I'm going to play devil's advocate now. So playing devil's advocate, do you think that maybe the manufacturers are saying up to 12 months because otherwise they wouldn't be able to sell their parachutes in Germany and France?
I think that's a very good point, and not one we would get an answer to. So, yeah. Okay, well, thanks, folks. I just wanted to try and give you an idea of where the committee had got to and where things were at, and why I think we need to do more work. Anybody who wants to do some of that work for me, that's brilliant. But yeah, watch this space. I don't think it's going away. I think we will come back to it. But I also have never felt that this was something we needed to do overnight. I think it's something, if we're going to do, we're going to do it one time. So let's try and do it properly and actually have a case that we can make. So thank you.